Let's talk a little bit about the differences between the standard version of Resolve and the studio version of Resolve, because there are important differences that you might need to know, especially when you are starting out. Now, this is not the full list. I'm actually putting a link on the screen right now where you can go and find the full list of the differences. These are just ones that I think are going to be important for you to know if you're just starting out. Now, obviously, the first big difference between the standard version and the studio version is that the standard version is free. The studio version is $295. Now, for Mac users, please do not pay for and download the one off the App Store. It is not the exact same application as the one that you would purchase through a third-party authorized Blackmagic Design reseller. Couple huge differences is that the one from the App Store does not support external cards or external hardware running through Thunderbolt, which is a big problem. The other big issue is that some of the OFX plugins may not work in the App Store version of Resolve that would work in the one that you would purchase through a reseller. So please, if you're on a Mac and you're going to purchase Resolve, please just use a reseller. You can find it, resellers on the Blackmagic Design website where you can purchase Resolve if you want to go down that route. Now, second huge difference between the standard version and the studio version is in the standard version, your projects can only go up to UHD size, 3840 by 2160 and up to 60 frames per second. Now, that doesn't mean you can't work with footage that's larger than that raster dimension. It just means that your final master can only be a maximum of UHD at 60 frames per second. Next, inside of the standard version, there is no noise reduction or motion blur. Inside of the standard version, you don't have access to face detection, which is the ability to have Resolve scan all your footage, pick out all the different faces so that you can easily search for things. Like, for example, if it's found a face and you've identified that face as Sally and you need to find Sally at any given time, you can just type in Sally in the search window and you'll be brought to all the clips that contain Sally. All right, keep in mind, not in the standard version, only in the studio version. And last but certainly not least, let's talk effects. For Resolve effects, you have access to them inside the standard version, but not all of them. Inside of the studio version, you'll have access to analog damage, chromatic adaptation, chromatic aberration, stylize, and pencil sketch in the studio version only. When it comes to OFX plugins are plugins that not only are developed by Blackmagic Design, but also by third parties. You're not going to have access to lens blur, camera blur, lens flare, and film grain, as well as another very handy one called face refinement, also known as a beauty effect. Now, OFX or Open Effects plugin structure is really how the third parties get their effects into DaVinci Resolve. And what's important to keep in mind is that many third-party Open Effects plugins might use features that are not available inside of the standard version of Resolve, only the studio version. So your mileage is going to vary. And what I normally tell people to do is to always download the demo. Most companies will offer a free demo with a watermark to try it to make sure it's actually going to work before you decide to make that purchase.